The old house stood on a hill that slumped into the sea, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised grey of a perpetual New England twilight. Elias Thorne bought it for a song, sight unseen, lured by the promise of isolation, a place where the shrieking of gulls would be the only interruption to the frantic clicking of his keyboard. He was a writer, and he needed a ghost. He just didn't think he'd find a real one. The real estate agent, a woman with a strange smile and eyes that never quite met his, had called it a property with character. The locals in the nearby fishing village of Port Blossom had other words. They called it Silas's Folly, or more simply, the toy maker's house. Silas Blackwood, they told him in hushed tones at the one dreary pub in town, had been the last owner. A master craftsman of puppets and dolls, he had lived and died in that house. A recluse consumed by a private grief after his young daughter Lily had vanished from her room one winter's night nearly a century ago. Elias, a professional skeptic and a connoisseur of morbid tales, was enchanted. He spent the first week in a whirlwind of activity, battling dust bunnies the size of small animals and wrestling with rusted shut windows. The house groaned around him, a symphony of settling timber and whistling drafts. It was on the 8th day, while trying to find the source of a persistent chill in the attic, that he found the room. Behind a section of water-stained floral wallpaper that peeled away like sunburnt skin, there was no wood or plaster, but the faint outline of a door. It had no knob, only a small keyhole-shaped opening near the edge. Using the tip of a crowbar, he pried it open. The hinges screamed in protest. The air that billowed out was cold and smelled faintly of lavender and decay. It was a child's nursery, untouched by the century of neglect that had ravaged the rest of the house. A layer of fine dust coated everything like a delicate shroud. A small rocking horse stood frozen mid-gallop, its painted eyes wide. A crib in the corner was empty, but in the center of the room, sitting primly in a child-sized rocking chair, was a puppet. It was a marionette, about 3 feet tall, carved and painted with breathtaking skill. It was a girl with porcelain skin, rosy cheeks, and lips curved into a gentle, knowing smile. Her eyes were startlingly realistic, made of deep blue glass that seemed to drink the light from Elias's flashlight. She wore a lace-trimmed velvet dress, and her dark, synthetic curls were tied with a silk ribbon. Elias felt a professional appreciation for the artistry, but an unprofessional shiver traced its way down his spine. The strings of the marionette were not tangled, but draped neatly over the back of the chair, as if its master had just set it down and stepped away. He left the door ajar, telling himself the chill was just a draft from the sea. That night, the sound started. It began as a soft, rhythmic creaking from the attic above his bedroom. The house settling, he told himself, rolling over and pulling the pillow over his head. But the creaking was joined by a soft pattering sound, like a child's bare feet running on old floorboards. The next morning, driven by a nagging unease, he went back to the attic. He shone his light into the hidden nursery. Everything was as he had left it, except for one detail. The puppet in the chair was no longer looking straight ahead. Its head was tilted slightly, its glass eyes now seeming to stare directly at the doorway, directly at him. "My mind is playing tricks on me," he muttered, the words sounding hollow in the oppressive silence. He was a horror writer. His job was to invent things that go bump in the night. It was only natural his work would follow him home. He forced a laugh, shut the hidden door, and spent the rest of the day working furiously on his manuscript, the story of a haunted lighthouse keeper. But the house wouldn't let him forget. A few days later, he was in the kitchen making coffee when he saw it. The puppet. It was sitting at the far end of the long hallway, propped against the wall, its legs splayed out, its smiling face a pale moon in the gloom. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He hadn't touched it. He hadn't been back in the attic. He backed away from the hallway, his coffee forgotten. He grabbed his coat and car keys and fled to the village, not stopping until he was back in the smoky safety of the pub. He found an old-timer named Jebediah nursing a beer at the bar. Jebediah was one of the few who had been willing to talk about the toy maker's house. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son," the old man rasped. "The puppet," Elias choked out. "The one in the nursery." Jebediah's face went pale. "Lily's doll. He made it for her. Said it looked just like her." The old man leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "After she was gone, Silas went mad. People said he'd lock himself in that nursery for days, talking to that puppet as if it were his daughter. They said he was trying to put her soul inside it. He was dabbling in things a man ought not to dabble in." The story was absurd, the stuff of local legend. But when Elias returned to the house that evening, the puppet was gone from the hallway. A frantic search revealed it was back in its chair in the nursery, its head now tilted the other way, as if it had grown bored of its previous position. The nights grew worse. He started having nightmares. He was in the house, but it was pristine and new. A little girl with dark curls and a velvet dress would giggle from just out of sight, her voice echoing through the halls. "Come find me," she would sing. "Let's play hide and seek." He would wander the corridors, a growing dread coiling in his stomach, until he would open a door and find the puppet, its smile wider, its glass eyes burning with a cold, hungry light. He would wake up sweating, the sound of a child's laughter lingering in his ears. He was losing his mind. He was sure of it. He decided he had to get rid of the thing. One night, mustering all his courage, he marched up to the attic, grabbed the puppet, and carried it out to the cliffside behind the house. The wind whipped his hair and clothes, and the sea crashed against the rocks below. He built a pyre of driftwood and doused it with lighter fluid. He threw the puppet onto the pile. He struck a match. The flame sputtered, then caught. As the fire began to lick at the puppet's velvet dress, the air grew unnaturally cold. A sound came from the house, not a creak or a groan, but a high, piercing shriek of pure rage. It was the sound of a child's tantrum, amplified into something monstrous. Elias stared in horror as the flames blackened the puppet's dress, but refused to consume the porcelain or the wood beneath. The painted smile seemed to twist into a grotesque, hateful sneer. Then, the house behind him exploded into chaos. Every light flickered on and off. Windows shattered, spraying glass into the night. The front door slammed open and shut with concussive force. He realized his mistake. He hadn't been haunted by a house. He was being haunted by her, Lily, and she was tied to the puppet. Destroying it wasn't the answer. It was like attacking the hornet's nest. He turned and ran, back towards the house, towards the source of the fury. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that the answer had to be inside. The spirit of Lily was now a physical force. As he stumbled through the front door, a portrait of some forgotten Blackwood ancestor flew off the wall and shattered at his feet. A spectral wind howled through the corridors, slamming doors in his path. "I don't want to play anymore," he screamed into the maelstrom. A cold, giggling voice answered from everywhere at once. "You have to. It's my house, my rules." He remembered something else Jebediah had said, a detail he'd dismissed. Silas buried her with her favorite locket, but after a week, he dug her up, said she couldn't breathe. He took the locket back. The town thought he'd sold it for booze money, but he never touched a drop. He put it somewhere safe, Elias thought, his mind racing, somewhere close to her. He fought his way through the psychic storm, dodging flying books and splintering furniture, his goal the smoldering pyre outside. The puppet lay in the embers, charred but intact. He grabbed a piece of driftwood and, with a desperate cry, smashed it against the puppet's chest. The porcelain cracked. He struck it again and again, until the chest cavity splintered open. There, nestled in a bed of old yellowed cotton, was a small, heart-shaped silver locket, tarnished with age. He snatched it up. It was cold, so cold it burned his skin. The shrieking in the house reached a fever pitch. He ran from the pyre, back towards the cliff edge, the locket clutched in his hand. "You want it?" he yelled. "Here it is!" With all his might, he hurled the locket into the churning sea below. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The wind died. The house fell still. Then, one last sound echoed from the cliffs. It was the wail of a little girl, a sound not of rage, but of profound, heartbreaking loss. It faded into the crash of the waves and then was gone. Behind him, the puppet on the pyre crumbled, collapsing in on itself until it was nothing more than a pile of fine grey ash that the returning wind scattered into the night. Elias didn't wait for morning. He got in his car, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the keys, and drove. He didn't look back at the dark house on the hill. He drove until the sun came up, until the haunted coastline of New England was a distant memory in his rearview mirror. He lives in a small, bright apartment in the heart of a city that never sleeps. He finished his book, but it wasn't about a lighthouse keeper. It was about a toy maker. It was the best thing he'd ever written, and he swore he would never write another word of horror again. Most nights, the noise of the city is enough to drown everything out. But sometimes, in the deepest, quietest hours before the dawn, he thinks he can hear it. A faint, distant echo on the edge of hearing, the sound of a little girl laughing in the dark.